Hey, welcome back to the critique. I'm really ready to dive right into today's.
Yeah, me too. Let's get into it.
So just a quick recap, this material analyzes the geopolitical divergence between J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio regarding a controversial new Iran policy, severely criticizing the administration's perceived concessions and unfrozen assets. And jumping right in, relying on hypothetical political role reversals can inadvertently weaken the objective authority of the critique.
Yeah, that stood out to me right away.
I mean, early on, the source material dedicates just a huge chunk of text to this imagined scenario where Kamala Harris flies to Switzerland, praises Pakistan, and gets dictated to by Iranian cutouts.
Right. It's a super common rhetorical device. You flip the script to highlight the administration's hypocrisy.
I can see what you're going for. Let's see how we can strengthen this. Is there a risk that focusing solely on a hypothetical Kamala Harris scenario might actually dilute the incredible visual evidence of the Qatari negotiator correcting the typing? It feels like trading a real smoking gun for a plastic one.
Oh, absolutely. I love that analogy. It's exactly like trading a real smoking gun for a toy. When you create a fictional narrative, you give your critics an incredibly easy out.
Yeah, they just dismiss it entirely.
Right. They dismiss it as speculative. It momentarily distracts the audience from the very real and damaging factual optics the material already has.
So what's the better approach here? Because they clearly want to point out the double standard.
The suggestion is to ground comparative arguments entirely in historical precedent rather than imagine hypotheticals, to build an unassailable logical foundation.
So looking at what actually happened instead of what might happen.
Exactly. By comparing the current administration's actions directly to past verifiable events, the argument becomes bulletproof. It, demands serious engagement from both supporters and detractors.
Because you can't really argue with historical fact the way you can with a hypothetical Kamala Harris story.
Precisely. So, for concrete examples, instead of inventing that scenario, the author should explicitly juxtapose J.D. Vance's actions with the heavily criticized elements of the Obama-era JCPOA.
Oh, right. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The text already mentions that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It leverages the source material's existing point about the JCPOA, mentioning the IAEA 117 times.
Oh, wow. So you use that to show that Vance's claim of a major milestone regarding IAEA inspectors is just, it's a direct repetition of past policies.
Exactly. And to your point about the visual evidence, the text needs to focus intensely on the actual photo released by the Qataris.
That photo is wild.
It really is. Showing Vance being corrected on a computer by the Qatari negotiator, Alani Alfani, you don't need a hypothetical when you have an actual photo of that happening.
Yeah, that makes total sense. All right, moving on to the next major point. Presenting internal political dynamics as a strict binary of competence versus incompetence oversimplifies the broader strategic context.
Yeah, the framing here is a bit too black and white.
It really is. The text frames the administration's dynamics in absolute terms. You've got Marco Rubio, painted as the quiet pro, brilliantly managing Lebanon and Hezbollah behind the scenes.
Right, and then J.D. Vance is the woefully misguided figure of delivering this weak, humiliating surrender to Iran.
Which, misses the complexities of high-level statecraft. It makes the analysis feel slightly one-sided because it ignores why an administration might intentionally utilize two vastly different approaches simultaneously.
Yeah, it ignores the whole 4D chess aspect of politics.
So, as I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that Vance is failing while Rubio is succeeding. But could this be like a legal defense team where one lawyer bangs the table to create a distraction while the other quietly negotiates the plea deal with the judge? Does the text need to acknowledge that Vance's weakness might actually be a directed strategy rather than just sheer incompetence?
That is a fantastic way to look at it. Yes, the suggestion here is to acknowledge the potential strategic intent or structural constraints behind this divergence.
Like exploring the why behind the differing optics?
Exactly. It makes the critique much more robust. It demonstrates to the audience that the author understands that 4D political chess, even while they're criticizing the moves.
So we're not excusing the policy, we're just analyzing it more accurately.
Right. For instance, they could explore whether there is an intentional good cop, bad cop dynamic at play.
Oh, interesting. So Vance is designated to absorb the public fallout of the non-deal?
Yeah, exactly. While Rubio maintains crucial relationships with Israel and Lebanon.
That adds so much more depth to the analysis. And there's actually a line in the text where they kind of stumble into this.
The part about Trump's strategy?
Yeah, the brief mentioned that Rubio maybe knows stuff about what President Trump's strategy is behind the scenes.
They need to expand on that heavily. Challenge the audience to consider if Vance is simply executing orders out of political expediency.
Just draw a direct line between the policy and the overarching strategy.
Exactly. It shows you're engaging with the administration's actual playbook, not just calling them names.
Right. Okay, let's look at the flow of the piece. Abrupt transitions between geopolitical analysis and deeply theological concept can disorient the audience and dilute the core message.
This was definitely the most jarring part of the read for me.
Yeah, the source material abruptly jumps from a highly technical geopolitical breakdown of the Iran MOU, unfrozen assets, the Strait of Hormuz, IEA inspectors.
Right, all this really dense policy stuff.
Straight into a promo for a documentary about Amalek, which they describe as an ancient spiritual virus of nonsense.
Yeah, that sudden pivot from hard political commentary to a profound spiritual and historical concept just feels incredibly disjointed.
It really does. It potentially causes the audience mental whiplash. Okay, so what I really like about this part is the depth of the Amalek concept. But building on that point, what if we looked at it from the perspective of the pacing? If I'm listening to a breakdown of grain sales and frozen assets, and suddenly I'm hearing about a 3,000-year-old spiritual virus from the Talmud, might I feel like I've accidentally switched channels? How do we weave that thread tighter?
You would absolutely feel like you switched channels. And the fix here is structural. The suggestion is to build a deliberate thematic bridge that seamlessly connects the geopolitical behavior discussed earlier to the theological concept introduced at the end.
So we need to show how they're...
Exactly. By demonstrating how the modern political situation is a direct manifestation of the historical and spiritual complacency discussed in the documentary.
Oh, that makes sense. Then both sections of the piece end up reinforcing one another.
Right. And they actually have a great hook for this already in the text. They have this line, "How have we convinced ourselves of nonsense?"
They should use that as a structural anchor, right?
Yeah. Expand on this by explaining that relying on a piece of paper for guarantees while unfreezing billions of dollars is the modern-day equivalent of succumbing to the spiritual virus of Amalek.
That's a great connection. It takes the literal nonsense of the Iran deal and ties it to the spiritual nonsense.
Exactly. And you can draw a parallel between the naivety of the post-World War I German appeasement, which is mentioned earlier in the text, and the Talmudic warnings of Amalek whispering, "Nothing is sacred."
So you frame the current Iran negotiations not just as a policy failure, but as a symptom of the exact civilizational amnesia the documentary warns against.
Yeah, it makes the inclusion of the documentary feel essential rather than like a random pop-up ad at the end of the text.
Wow, that completely changes how the ending lands. It makes it so much stronger.
It really does. It elevates the whole.
All right, well, we've covered some really great ground today. Let's do a quick recap. The critique covered refining the argumentation by replacing hypotheticals with historical precedents.
Right, dropping the Kamala Harris scenario for the JCPOA comparisons.
We also talked about elevating the geopolitical analysis by exploring the strategic nuances between Rubio and Vance, instead of just calling one smart, the other incompetent.
Yeah, bringing in that good cop, bad cop dynamic.
And finally, smoothing the structural flow by thematically bridging the Iran policy breakdown with the concept of Amalek.
Right. So, for the actionable summary, to implement these changes, ground future comparisons in concrete events like the JCPOA.
Yep.
Introduce counter-theories for administration dynamics to appear more objective, and use transitional thematic anchors to tie hard news to philosophical or historical themes.
Well said. We warmly invite the listener to apply these suggestions and submit their revised work or entirely new material back to us for another critique. We'd love to see how it evolves.
Yeah, please do. It's a really interesting piece of writing.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.